Hey guys, welcome to Planet Zoo. If you're having problems with the transport rides, this video is for you. Today I'm talking about how to build them, how to operate them, and how to fix some of those stubborn bugs that seem to have plagued the transport rides for a really long time. I've been building a few transport rides lately, so I figured I'd share what I found in case it helps anybody else. First off, let's go over the basics of setting a ride up because some of the solutions will involve the different screens and tabs and things that you use when you're building a ride. To create a transport ride, you want to go into the Facilities tab down here, and down at the very bottom of the screen here, you have the Transport Hub. Oh, just bear in mind, if you're playing in franchise or career mode, you need to get to level 4 of the mechanic research to unlock transport rides, so you won't have access to these until you've done that research. Anyway, when they're available, the transport rides are found down here. They all work exactly the same, so basically all the rides are the same thing. They use the same mechanics to build them and to have the ride running around. The only difference you get is with the train. Now, the train is vaguely different because instead of unloading as a car, the train will unload as the whole train. So it's a little bit more efficient than the other rides if you were going for efficiency. Aside from that, there's literally no difference other than aesthetics. So to set up a transport ride, just click any of the rides in the tab. So if I click on the monorail, you can see the first station pops up like this. It will be aligned to the grid when you first click on it and bring it out. So if you want it to be aligned, if you're doing like a grid layout for your zoo, don't touch it. Or if you press the Z key, it'll move it in increments, which is still keeping on the grid. If you want it to be more free placement, then hold the Z key down and you can turn it in any direction that way. If you want a little more accuracy, as in changing the height as well, then press the X key before you place it, and this brings up the advanced move, and you can move it up using the up arrow, you can move it sideways using these two arrows. The white arrow here, this indicates which way the ride will be going, so when you start building the track, the ride will be going in that direction. So let's place this down, and you can see this automatically triggers the track building. There's basically two elements to building a transport ride, and that is building the track and building the stations. So you can see here, there's two tabs, one for the track and one for the stations. First thing we want to do here, you'll notice that where I put this ride down, the track has built this ugly hole in the floor. And that's because the auto tunnel button is turned on here. So what we want to do is turn that off straight away, and that'll change this to be nice and even across the floor. Auto tunnel is more useful if you want to build underground, but right now we're just going to do this on the surface, so clicking off auto tunnel just makes this nice and neat, no ugly hole in the floor. So the basic concept of building a track, every time you click on here, it will auto generate another piece in front of that. And you can move the piece by click the ruler, that makes it longer. The side arrows, this changes the direction. The up arrow, this changes the elevation. And this semicircular thing up here, if you click this and drag either side, it changes the tilt of the ride. Now, I've not found a real use for tilt in Planet Zoo. In Planet Coaster, this was very important because you wanted to make a nice smooth transition around the track because the guests would complain if it got too nauseous. Nausea isn't a thing in Planet Zoo, so if you ask me, this is obsolete. Now, depending what you're using the transport ride for, you're probably going to want to add another station at some point. So to do that, you click on the station button up here, and then you choose one of the following four options. The arrows here indicate which way that the station entrance and exit will be. So this one means that when you're looking forward, so in the direction that the train or whatever transport ride it is will go, that means that the entrance and exit will be on the left. Then this one means that it will start, you'll go in on the left and out on the right. This one's the other way. And then the final one here means that the entrance and the exit will be on the right. Now, to build this station, you might think that similar to the track, if you click either side of this, it will build the station. No, controls have to be awkward. So when you click this once, yes, it basically confirms that you want to make a station, but it automatically goes to the option of making the station bigger rather than going back to the track. So all you need to do is press the escape key once. That confirms that you've built the station and that you want to go back to building track. Very awkward controls for that, very confusing, not exactly all that intuitive, so I can understand where people have had problems with this. So that's the basics of putting in the tracks and putting in the stations. Now we need to complete the loop by sending this back to the beginning station. You can do this manually by gradually bringing your track around in a loop by adding bits of track, or the easy way to do it, once you've got in as much track as you know you'll need, if you press the auto complete button here, the game will automatically complete the track for you and connect it up to the station. Depending how you've built your track, and if you've tried to get it almost back to the station and then you say, oh screw it, I'm going to get the auto complete to do it, sometimes it won't because the game can't find the right angle for it, so you'll just have to keep deleting bits of track until you get to the point where it can find the route. Anyway, there we go. We've got a completed monorail loop here with 2 stations connected up. That's the first stage of building a transport ride. Next, we need to make these stations operational. To do that, you need to escape out of track editing, so press your escape key until you're just back in the normal game. Then when you click on each station in turn, this new tab will come up. This is basically the control panel for the whole monorail ride, and this first tab is for the stations. So if we click on this one here, it gives you a very brief checklist of what you need to do to get the station operational. So we need to place an entrance, place an exit, and we need to connect up to an entrance path. For efficiency, if that's your goal, you want to place the entrance and exit as close to where people will get on and off the ride as possible, because the animation they go through to get on and off is really long. And if you place the entrance and exit at the end of the station, that's going to take 5-10 seconds longer each time. Trust me, if you're going for efficiency, get it right down in the middle here. So let's connect this up, and we need to put down a little bit of an entrance path here for it to work. So here we go, put down the entrance path and connected that to the exit as well. And that has triggered the little guy here to stand in front of the entrance, which means that this station is pretty much ready to go. Now, to save a little bit of time, I've done exactly the same with the second station. So these are all connected up and ready to go. Now, you'll notice on the tabs here that the stations are still closed. And you might be wondering, why does it have a little button here that says test? The only reason I think they have this is because, again, this harks back to the Planet Coaster days when you'd run a test to see how comfortable the ride was, how exciting the ride was, but none of those controls exist in Planet Zoo. So basically, this is a function that serves no purpose. You don't need to test it. You can go straight to turning it to green and making this ride turn on. There is some controls we still need to look at before we turn this on properly. One thing to remember about the transport ride is that most of the controls, you can only change things when the ride is turned off. The tab we're interested in is this one with the exclamation mark, and this is where we can change some of the settings for the loading and offloading. So minimum wait time, this is the minimum amount of time that the car of the ride will wait at a station for guests to get on before it leaves the station. This time also includes the time it takes for people to get off as well, which is about 10 to 15 seconds long. So I'm going to put this to 30 seconds. So at the minimum, it's going to wait 30 seconds before it moves on. Maximum wait time. This is the maximum amount of time that the ride will wait for people to arrive at the station to load. It's handy to have that a little bit longer. I'm going to set this to 40 seconds, which to me should be enough. The don't block the station option. This causes more problems than it does solutions, so I recommend not turning that on. With this on, you tend to end up with the ride leaving the station with nobody on the cars. Save yourself some hassle in the future and just leave it turned off. So that's the controls for the station sorted out. Now, if you click over onto another station, this will now bring up the control panel for the whole monorail. You'll notice the exclamation box tab has now moved to the end, and that's the one we want to take a look at. This gives us the option for the transport mode, so we can have this in a continuous loop, which is what we've set up here. If you wanted this to be a shuttle, you just have the stations connected and you don't loop the track back up to the starting station. And what will happen there is the ride will just go point to point between each of the stations rather than doing a loop. Underneath this option is the option that we definitely want to take a look at, and that's number of cars. Right now we only have one car, which is certainly not enough for the amount of traffic that would be going through your average zoo. So I'm going to increase this to about 6 for now. And you'll notice here, it distributes it evenly between all of the stations, so it's not all lumped up into one station. The max speed option, again, I don't see a point why we've got this because Planet Zoo doesn't use these controls to affect what people think of the ride. I can whack this up to maximum speed. Now, in a Planet Coaster game, the guests would be really upset with that, but in Planet Zoo, I honestly haven't seen it make any difference other than speeding the ride up and making it more efficient. So I don't see why there would be an issue if you did whack this up to full speed. Anyway, now that we changed all the settings here, we can turn this back to green so it's on. And I'll stress again here, if you need to change any of these settings or you want to play around with them, you have to turn the rides off before you can do that. But that's the basics of what you do to set up the ride. I do want to mention quickly some basic tips that might help when you're setting up. Number 1 is tunneling. If you want to create stations or track that goes underground, turn on the tunneling option and it will carve out the right shape, so like a tube shape for the ride as you go underground, and it saves you having to push all the landscape out of the way when you're doing that. My second tip, if you're creating a track yourself and you make an adjustment of the track or you do something that looks a bit funky, select it all and then click smooth all, because that will, where it can, the game will smooth out the track and it doesn't affect the gameplay in any way, but it makes it look a bit nicer. Tip number 3, when you open a ride, it's going to be hugely popular at the beginning because whenever you open something new in Planet Zoo, it's always super popular for that first 10 minutes or so. So if you get a huge queue at your first station, don't worry about that, it will ease out eventually. When the game's been running for a little while, you need to have a look and assess how popular the ride is, and you can make adjustments with the ride to make it more or less popular depending on how many people are waiting to ride. So if it's still super popular and there's loads of people trying to ride and the queue is out the door, then increase the ticket price. Or if the track allows for it, add more cars. You get to a certain point where adding more cars doesn't help because it still takes the 30-40 seconds for it to load and unload. And when you factor that in, adding more cars won't make a difference. However, if you did increase the ticket price, it will make the ride slightly less popular, but you'll still get plenty want to ride and you'll be making more money out of those that do. Vice versa, if the ride isn't very popular, then you need to decrease the ticket price. Alternatively, get rid of some of the cars so it takes longer for guests to get around and there's less availability of cars for people to ride. Or add some shops, add some high value exhibits and enclosures next to the stations, and that will increase the popularity. That's my key tips to making this run smoothly when you do open a ride. Now, onto the main feature, some of the bugs that I've come across recently and how I fix them. My number 1 bug has been that some of the info tabs on the transport rides just disappear. So if you're setting up a transport ride and you've kind of followed the instructions that I went through with the tutorial bit of this video, if you're at the point where you need to click on the stations and then use the tab to put the entrance and exit in, if you go to do that and there's no option to put the entrance and exit in, don't worry, you're not going mad. I've come across a bug with the game where it just didn't appear in the tab. How I resolved this. Now, just a bit of background how I work with Planet Zoo. I have a desktop PC where I do most of my work with Planet Zoo. I also have a laptop where if I'm wanting to be a bit more sociable, I'll use the laptop so that I can use that in the living room rather than having to play the game tucked away in my office, basically. When this error first came up with the transport ride, I was working on my laptop. So at first, I couldn't understand if it was something that I'd done wrong. After looking on the forums for a little bit, I was like, no, there's clearly something wrong with this. So I closed the game down, opened it back up, went back into the zoo, and it was still the same problem. Next, I went up to my desktop PC, opened the game up again, opened the park up, and surprise, surprise, the tab that had been missing on my laptop was there on the desktop PC. So whatever happened between opening the park up on the laptop and opening it up on the PC, it fixed it. In theory, it's probably just you have to close the game down a couple of times and open it back up until it resets itself. The second bug that I've come across recently is guests just not using the rides, where you've got a ride set up, it's all open, everything's good with the track, and guests just walk up to the path and then they turn away, they don't get on. What I figured out with this one, it's an issue with the codes with the guests. So if you've messed with your track at all, or you've fiddled with something and you had to close the ride and then you opened it back up again, sometimes the guests get stuck in a loop where I think they assume that the ride ride is still closed. So to fix this, try closing the ride completely. If that doesn't work and your guests are still refusing to get on the ride, what I'd suggest is to close the ride down, then close the game, or at least go back to the main menu and then go back into your zoo, so that when you're starting the zoo up, your ride is already closed. If your guests are still refusing to get on your transport ride, you can try closing the park so it kind of ejects all of the guests that are in there. I tried this method and it worked for me. My next two bugs are, well, they are kind of bugs, but they're more user error bugs than what I call a system bug. The first one of these, if your guests are in the queue, but they're not getting onto the ride and the cars are just leaving the station empty, you're going to want to investigate if you've accidentally or maybe on purpose checked the box that says don't block station. If you've ticked the don't block station box, that means that the cars may leave the station because it's taking too long for the animation to run through for guests to get off the ride, and it's not leaving enough time for guests to get on. So invariably the car will just leave the station with no guests on. So check that first in case that's an issue. Another user error kind of issue is if you don't have part of the track powered. So if you're not playing in creative mode and you've not got that button that you don't need power turned on, then you need to make sure that each part of the track is powered, because otherwise it won't run. Another kind of error where maybe guests aren't getting onto a ride would be if you've set a ride up and the station gets off at an area where you haven't got a guest path leading back to the entrance. Now that can cause an issue where you might get a guest that's willing to get on the ride to get to that area, but they might not be prepared to get the transport ride back to the original station. So make sure you've got a guest path leading back to the main entrance for every area that you set up, even if it's a really long way. Sometimes guests just decide they don't want to use the ride back and they'll end up just stuck in that area that they're sent to on the first part of the journey. So yeah, just make sure you've got paths everywhere as well. The only other error that I'm aware of, now I haven't had this one personally, but I've read that some people had this issue in Planet Zoo, and I have experienced this error myself in Planet Coaster, which is using the same mechanics basically. So with this one, if you've got people that are stuck on your transport ride, so they love it so much that they refuse to get off even if their stats have gone red, try closing the stations and that will force them to get off at the next stop. I'm not entirely sure what causes this error, but if you're finding that people are just going round and round on the transport rides and they're refusing to get off, just close the stations and restart them up again, and that should fix the issue. If it doesn't, do the thing where you close the game, open the game back up. Maybe as well, try editing the track. So take out a tiny piece of track, put it back in, then reopen the ride again, and that should do the trick. That's everything that I've been through and what I can offer as a basic tutorial in how to get these transport rides running properly, because when you do have them going, they are a nice little addition to the game. So hopefully this has helped. Thanks so much for watching. Bye for now.